welcome back. Time for Cryptonomics, and once again, a correlation theory. Bitcoin's price dropped this weekend, and as always, the sphere is looking for reasons. There are those who would argue that when traditional markets gain value, Bitcoin bleeds and vice versa. But can it be proven? This time around, after a weekend that saw a drop in the BTC price, we of course wonder. And to speculate along with me, I am joined in studio by none other than Usher WESTROPP-EVANS, BLOCKTV's senior correspondent. Usher, so can we prove it this time around?
Okay, I mean, proof is not the name of the game here, Yael, but keeping that correlation going. Exactly.
Okay.
So, I mean, what we've seen, the greater market factors we need to look at here are primarily coming from the US-China trade war, which saw some easing of tensions, a slight rollback of some limitations, some of the tariff limitations. The Chinese have agreed to buy some US agricultural products. The US has agreed to roll back a couple of tariffs in the start, but that's not yet the sort of the full pullback that we'd look for and we'd really hope for.
When we're looking for that correlation.
Exactly. Okay. But that being said, it was enough to get the market skyrocketing. And as we can see here, I've got a chart here of the S&P 500 where we see that it has reached new all-time highs. Broken back through the lows that started off 2019. It started off a little bit rough as we see that massive dip just over here, but it has climbed steadily ever since with a few dips almost all related to US-China tariffs.
I was about to say, which makes me just say that, if these two entities just sign a bloody deal, think of what that will do for the markets.
The markets are really tied to this right now, Yael, for better or worse. And again, it's not necessarily for better because, as many analysts say, with sort of more in-depth knowledge of what's going on there, we're unlikely to see a full, meaningful deal take place before the next US election, still about a year off. Because as it stands, the Chinese are going to want to try and maximize their deal. Yeah. If they have a new president they can work with, then likely they'll hopefully, in their minds, at least have a more favorable negotiating standpoint. And if Trump's still in place, then at least he's a known entity and they have to know what to do moving forward. Yep. So regardless, the Chinese don't have a lot of incentive to make that deal until that point. And they seem to be bearing the weight while it's costing them a lot of money. Manufacturing is on the rise. They're still managing to maintain a solid level of growth and their economy is hurting, but not enough to the point where they'll be willing to give those great concessions that the US is looking for in terms of intellectual property rights, in terms of increased purchasing from the US and dealing with that trade deficit issue that Trump is so concerned about. So, markets are going up. We've painted the picture why people think for the short term that there's a bit of an ease back of tensions. Right. But let's look at how that's impacting those safe haven assets that we're so concerned about. So here we have a market of gold on the day, and we can see that we're talking about the 7th and 8th, the end of last week, gold had a relative nosedive. Now, for those in the crypto sphere, the loss of 1.5% is not such a big day.
I wouldn't call that a dip.
That's a Wednesday. That's exactly. That's a day of the week. But in the gold markets, which have liquidity orders of magnitude higher, this is a significant dip and one that should be observed. So we see that happening on the 7th and 8th. Then we flick over to Bitcoin US dollar. And what should we see on the 7th and 8th? But with a slight delay, a 1.5% followed by a 4.7% decline on the day. And then very tepid trading over the weekend when gold markets really aren't trading. And we can see that Bitcoin is still waiting for clear direction. But we are again seeing that correlation, which for better or worse, people have been pushing the narrative of Bitcoin as a safe haven asset. And that's where we see gold dipping, we see Bitcoin dipping. That correlation is a little bit back on track. I mean, obviously, gold didn't see that massive shoot up that we saw on the 25th, 6th of October.
I was about to say, I mean, the correlation seems to exist usually only when, when there's a drop.
Exactly. And interestingly, Yael, it seems to exist when there are those larger market events, those external narratives that are playing.
Traditional markets.
Exactly, that are playing in the space that do seem to impact Bitcoin as a safe haven as much as it does gold or any other of those safe haven assets. There does seem to be this flight out of Bitcoin when other markets are strong and when traders can say, hey, you know what? I don't need to stay in Bitcoin because the market's so strong. Why am I wasting my time here? I need to get out of the safe havens and do that. We saw the same thing happen with US treasuries, with bonds. We see the same thing happen with gold. We're seeing it happen with Bitcoin. Narratives have a strong sort of emphasis here when it comes to financial markets.
Narratives have a huge influence. Narratives, tweets as of late.
Exactly.
Entirely. And I'm wondering with you also, the correlation, not just that correlation, but that narrative of regular markets, traditional markets need to bleed for Bitcoin to rise is always a narrative that I question, is that what's going to get this thing to the moon? because
it's an important question, and it's there's not a clear answer. We have certainly seen in smaller countries in times of crisis in the past, whether we're talking about the Euro crisis, whether we're talking about in Venezuela, in Argentina at the moment.
But that's not the U.S.
It's not the U.S. So we don't yet know what happens because the U.S. has been going through an unprecedentedly long growth stage, 10 years of uninterrupted
10 years of growth as being touted by the American president.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that unparalleled level of growth has meant that Bitcoin hasn't been tested in a time of full-blown crisis. Maybe for better, maybe for worse. And as so many say, it's about having that infrastructure in place so that when that big test comes, it's ready. But we have seen the smaller test cases, and they've played out somewhat well. I mean, is Argentina embracing Bitcoin wholesale? No, but there's certainly an uptick of interest. Same in Venezuela, the same in Zimbabwe, where we saw those premiums of around 1,000% on larger scale markets, in the OTC markets there in Zimbabwe. Certainly, there are correlations that hint to a lot of things. We're just yet to see that big picture test, see if it really comes through.
Exactly.
But we're seeing those hints, and that's the important point to focus on today, as the trade war has pointedly not ended, as consumer confidence may be still high, but CEO confidence, as polled, recently comes out at record lows. They are deeply concerned, and a lot of CEOs and executives around the sort of business world are deeply concerned about the future markets and the risks of recession. So let's
and
wait
that
and see.
said, given the fact that, and I'm wondering with you, just there's also this tidbit at the end of the day about crypto exchanges.
Yeah, so that's referring there to the Larry Cermak article he wrote for The Block, where the Block Crypto, where he said that crypto exchanges are experiencing a 37% traffic drop since June. You know what? Look, that doesn't bode well for crypto, and it makes sense given the sort of narrative we've seen play out when the sort of spike, again, related to Libra, I won't say caused by Libra, that happened around the June-July period.
Entirely, but then Libra's getting so much bad press,
Exactly.
and crypto being funny money is a headline in the press constantly.
And again, markets keep going up. We look back at, we can see that S&P chart again here, pulled up. It has
maybe it's as simple as that. People thinking, why do I need Bitcoin?
Exactly. When the markets they've been up, they're up over 18% on the year. I mean, that's a staggering growth for equities markets. Why do you need Bitcoin, which can go through all kinds of volatility and absurdity, when you've got a solidly, steadily growing marketplace that's seeing some very significant gains? So it's
narratives and interesting questions. I have a feeling we'll keep asking ourselves.
Certainly.
For the foreseeable future. Asha WESTROPP-EVANS, thank you so much for. By the way, we are taping this on a Sunday. This is the end of this weekend drop, so to speak. From where we're at the world, where does Bitcoin stand at this point right now? Hovering somewhere around the 8, right? But as we said, traditional markets yet to open. If they're correlated or not, who knows? Let's see how this week opens. We were Cryptonomics on BLOCKTV. We'll be right back.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.